first is slow, silent, and deep like poison spreading unseen. A historic fuel shortage has paralyzed half the country, halting harvests in the fields, keeping ambulances from hospitals, and stalling production in factories. The second is sudden, loud, and shocking. Ukrainian kamikaze drones striking Moscow, hitting the homes of the elite, shattering the image of an invincible Kremlin. These aren't two separate problems, they are two acts of the same story. Putin's war machine being dismantled from within and without. The question is, how long can this war continue when an energy superpower can't fuel its own people or protect its capital? Russia, one of the world's largest oil producers, has always boasted of energy security. But drone attacks that began in late summer and escalated through fall have turned that confidence into a weapon against itself. On one side, the world's largest oil fields. On the other, miles-long lines of empty gas tanks. From Primory in the Far East to the Black Sea coast in occupied Crimea, from St. Petersburg to Siberia, the country faces a fuel crisis unlike anything seen before. Gasoline coupons, lines forming hours before dawn, people waiting for hours for just 10 liters of fuel, reminders of a Soviet past in the heart of a modern Russia. This crisis isn't limited to one city or region. Key refineries, pumping stations, and loading terminals, critical nodes for both domestic supply and exports, have been repeatedly targeted. When these interconnected points shut down simultaneously, logistics grind to a halt. Industrial cities, pipelines, ports, everything freezes. The paralysis stretches across 11 time zones, affecting roughly 30 million people. For ordinary Russians, mornings start at 5 a.m., standing in hopeless lines, hoping to fill a tank if they're lucky. The engines don't run, and a modern country can quickly stop functioning. But the crisis isn't just economic, it's also explosive. On September 22nd, sirens screamed over Moscow. Explosions shattered the city's glass towers, set buildings on fire in Barvika, Rubliovka, and Moscow City, and reached places even the elite thought were untouchable. Ukrainian UAVs were everywhere, coordinated, striking at least 9 areas simultaneously. Russia claimed to shoot down dozens, but even one drone reaching its target proved the system's vulnerability. Moscow's safe bubble burst. As the sky burned, gas stations nationwide continued to dry up. Fuel is the lifeblood of modern society. When it slows, the entire system, transportation, healthcare, agriculture, industry, starts failing. Farmers in the south couldn't run their harvesters. Refrigerated food trucks stopped moving. Ambulances ran dry, forced to wait for station chiefs' discretion. Logistics froze, deliveries delayed, construction projects halted, global supply chains disrupted. The empty pumps became a symbol of national humiliation. Panic buying, black markets, price spikes, and unsafe fuel storage compounded the problem. The state struggles both to supply fuel and to suppress the illegal market it helped create. Meanwhile, Ukrainian strikes hit Russia's critical refineries and pipelines. The Kurishi refinery in Leningrad Oblast, Lucille in Volgrad, Sizin and Novokveft in Samara, and Baltic corridor terminals were disrupted, shutting down production for days or weeks. These weren't minor inconveniences, they directly affected domestic supply. Moscow's privileged fuel queue, and even Russia's export backbone. The strategy is clear: strike where it hurts the most. Fuel keeps both the army and civilian life moving. Hitting refineries and pumping stations slows logistics more effectively than targeting crude fields. Every shutdown delays transport, inflates costs, and disrupts the front lines. Russia's military is feeling the strain. Armored units wait longer, drills are shortened, convoys run slower, and fuel stocks drop dangerously low. With winter approaching, competition between heating, shelter, and transport fuel will intensify. Every operational slowdown creates opportunities for further attacks. Economically, the losses are massive. Short-term refinery shutdowns reduce hundreds of thousands of barrels per day, translating to billions lost each month in potential revenue. Every empty pump, every delayed delivery, every stalled convoy becomes a reflection of a nation's fragility. Russia is witnessing for the first time how delicate its energy empire really is. A superpower unable to fuel its own people faces not just a logistical crisis, but a psychological one. Queues at gas stations now measure national morale. And when we combine this with drone attacks striking Moscow itself, how much patience does Putin really have left? Russia's empire of oil is showing cracks silent, slow, and deadly, like poison spreading, while explosions scream over the capital. The question remains, how long before the paralysis on the home front overtakes the war effort itself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest developments. These two crises are not separate. They are two acts of the same story. Putin's war machine slowly unraveling from within, while pressure builds from outside. How long can a war continue, when one of the world's largest oil producers cannot fuel its own people or defend its capital? For decades, Russia boasted of energy security. Its massive oil fields seemed unstoppable. But since late summer, drone attacks have turned that confidence into vulnerability. On one side, endless oil fields. On the other, miles of empty gas tanks. And citizens waiting in lines for hours just to get 10 liters of fuel from Primory in the Far East to Crimea's Black Sea coast. From St. Petersburg to Siberia, the crisis is national. Gasoline coupons reminiscent of the Soviet era and endless queues are now daily life. And this isn't limited to one city. It's a countrywide paralysis. Strategic refineries, pumping stations, and loading terminals, the heart of Russia's fuel network, have been repeatedly targeted. Their shutdowns create ripple effects. Industrial cities halt production, ports freeze, pipelines stall, and logistics across 11 time zones collapse. The result? Nearly 30 million people affected, directly or indirectly, for millions. Mornings start at 5 a.m., standing in lines, hoping to fill a tank if they're lucky. Engines don't run, trucks don't move, and a modern country starts to crumble. Then came September 22nd, Moscow's sirens screamed. Explosions shattered buildings in Barvika, Rubliavka, and Moscow City. Ukrainian drones were everywhere, coordinated, striking at least 9 areas simultaneously. Russia claimed dozens were shot down, but even a single drone breaching defenses proved the system had failed. Moscow's protective bubble burst. As drones burned the skyline, gas stations nationwide continued to dry up. Fuel is the lifeblood of a modern nation. Without it, every system slows. Farms, factories, ambulances, hospitals, and supply chains. Refrigerated trucks stall. Construction halts. Deliveries are delayed. Global trade is affected. This is not just inconvenience, it's humiliation. Citizens who grew up with the narrative of an energy superpower now face empty pumps and uncertainty. Panic buying, black markets, and unsafe fuel storage multiply the chaos. Meanwhile, Ukraine's strategy is precise. Key refineries Kurishi in Leningrad, Lucille in Volgrad-Sizin, and Novogevek in Samara, and Baltic terminals have been repeatedly struck. Fires burn, main processing units shut down, and even when controlled, restarting safely takes weeks. The impact: Moscow's fuel queues lengthen. Exports stall. Rail shipments and pipelines are delayed. Production of plastics, chemicals, and other industrial materials halts. The ripple effect touches every sector. Russia's military is also suffering. Armored units wait longer. Training exercises shorten. Convoys move slower. Fuel stocks drop dangerously low. With winter approaching, heating competes with transportation. The front lines slow, giving the enemy new opportunities. Economically, the losses are staggering. Hundreds of thousands of barrels of fuel are lost daily, costing billions in revenue. Every stalled refinery, every delayed convoy, every empty pump measures national morale. For the first time, Russia is seeing the fragility of its energy empire. A superpower unable to fuel its own people faces not only economic collapse, but a psychological test. Queues at gas stations now map the pulse of a nation. And when we add the drone strikes on Moscow, the stakes rise even higher. How much patience does Putin really have left? How long before the silent paralysis overtakes the war effort itself? This is more than a crisis. It's a test of endurance, logistics, strategy, and morale. It's the story of an energy giant showing cracks in its armor slowly, silently, and now, explosively. The country waits, watches, and queues. The capital burns. And the question lingers: when the engines stop, how long can an empire run on fumes? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest developments. The crisis in Russia now has two faces. One is slow, silent, and deep-seated like a poison. A historic fuel shortage that has paralyzed half the country, halting harvests in the fields. Ambulances heading to hospitals and production in factories. The other is sudden, loud, and shocking. Ukrainian kamikaze drones raining down on the heart of the capital, Moscow, on the homes of the Russian elite, shattering the Kremlin's invulnerability. These two crises are not independent events. They are two different acts of the same scenario, illustrating how Putin's war machine is being dismantled both from within and without. So, how much longer can this war be sustained when an energy giant cannot supply fuel to its own people or protect its capital? Russia, as one of the world's largest crude oil producers, has long boasted of its fuel security. However, the drone attacks that began in late summer and intensified throughout the fall turned this confidence into a knife turned against the country's internal fuel system. On one side, the world's largest oil fields. On the other, miles-long lines of empty gas tanks. Russia was experiencing a historic fuel crisis that paralyzed the country. In the Far East, in Primor, a line forming long before dawn on the Black Sea coast in occupied Crimea, gasoline coupons painfully reminiscent of the Soviet era. In the Northwest, an angry crowd waiting for a station to open for just 1 hour. This was no longer a problem for just one city or one region. The targets were not ordinary depots or insignificant ancillary facilities, but refineries, pumping stations, and loading terminals that, when shut down simultaneously, locked up both the domestic market and exports. The impact map was not limited to a single region. When successive blows hit interconnected nodes, such as central oblasts, industrial cities, port corridors, and pipelines, the picture went beyond just fuel shortages and disrupted the pace of logistics. This is a snapshot of a massive paralysis, a moment of freezing for an empire striking 11 time zones simultaneously. Stretching from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg, from Siberia to the Caucasus, the crisis's impact is so widespread that it indirectly affects approximately 30 million Russian citizens and directly impacts about 10 million. Now, millions of Russians wake up at 5 in the morning every day, queuing in those hopeless lines that steal hours from their lives, hoping to get just 10 L of gasoline by the end of the day, if they are lucky. In the fuel crisis, there are no sirens, no bombs exploding, but the engines are not running. And when the engines don't run, a modern country can lose its entire functioning. However, this loss of function is no longer just silent and economic. On the evening of September 22nd, the sound of sirens, sky-piercing explosions, and burning buildings reached the very gates of the Kremlin. That evening, tens of millions of Muscovites woke up to the realization that the war was not just a distant nightmare watched on television, but a concrete reality unfolding right outside their windows. Dozens of Ukrainian kamikaze UAVs appeared in the skies above the capital, seen as Russia's most protected, most untouchable stronghold, like a swarm of bees. This was not a single infiltration, but an extremely organized and daring attack targeting at least 9 different areas of the city simultaneously. The Russian Federation announced that it had shot down 26 drones in and around the capital. The explosions reverberated not only in the industrial outskirts of the city, but also in areas where the Russian elite live, such as Barvika and Rublio, which are surrounded by walls and protected by private security. And even in the glass towers of Moscow City, the modern financial heart of the capital. A fire broke out in a building in Kranogorsk, while buildings and vehicles were damaged in Stroganino and Nemchinovka. This was a clear message sent from Kiev to Moscow. If you strike our cities, we will strike your richest and most protected strongholds. Nowhere is safe for you. The panic that ensued during the attack shut down the capital's entire infrastructure. Drones were recorded in Ryazan, Saratov, England, and Kazan. The emergency cover carpet plan was activated to protect the airspace, and Moscow's 3 massive international airports, Vnukovo, Sheremetyevo, and Samara, were closed to all flights. Hundreds of flights were canceled or diverted to other cities, leaving tens of thousands of passengers stranded in terminals. Rosaviatsia reported that temporary restrictions were imposed on the acceptance and release of aircraft at Kazan, Gelendzhik, and Nynikoms airports. Passengers on a Dubai-Moscow flight were forced to spend the night on beds in the terminal at Nizhny Novgorod airport due to the drone attack on the Russian capital. Flight Su-531, which was expected to land in Moscow at 9:56 p.m., made an emergency landing in Nizhny Novgorod. Passengers waited in the cabin for about 3 hours before being transferred to the airport. The famous protective shield, consisting of billions of dollars worth of Pantsir and S-400 systems, claimed to have shot down dozens of UAVs. But even a single UAV reaching the most critical targets was enough to prove the failure of the entire system. Moscow's famous safe harbor bubble burst that morning amid the sound of hundreds of thousands of drone parts and broken glass. The war was now inside the homes of even the wealthiest Russians. As Moscow's sky burned, gas stations across the country continued to dry up. Fuel is like blood for modern societies, and when that blood flow slows, all organs begin to fail one by one. Just like Moscow's air defense system, which has now failed, the queues in front of the stations are therefore not just a problem for car owners. This is the pulse of a country's entire daily life rhythm coming to a standstill. Now, the wave spreading towards the central oblasts in Russia is no longer an exception in Moscow. The fuel crisis is now like a fire engulfing half of Russia. By mid-September, reports of gasoline shortages, quotas, and long gasoline queues came from regions close to the central axis, such as Ryazan, Nizhny, Saratov, Samara, Ulanovsk, Penza, Rostov, and Astrakhan. Independent sources emphasize that the fuel crisis has spread across Russia and is being felt severely in more than 20 regions, and this wave is touching the central axis. This means that Moscow is feeling more visible pressure on prices because the cost of keeping the capital in the privileged queue in the supply schedule increases as restrictions in other regions are extended. Agriculture was the first sector hit by the fuel crisis. In the middle of the harvest season, farmers in the fertile lands of the south of the country could not find diesel to run their combine harvesters. The loss of a farmer who cannot harvest his wheat on time is not only his personal bankruptcy, but also a harbinger of the bread queue in front of a bakery in Moscow months later. When refrigerated food trucks dependent on the cold chain get stuck in warehouses or on the roads, it means not only tons of produce rotting, but also the price of that product doubling on supermarket shelves in the city. The healthcare system presents the most tragic face of this crisis. On paper, ambulances have priority for fuel. In practice, however, when fuel runs out at a single station in a small town, it is up to the discretion of the station chief, not a doctor, to decide which emergency case the ambulance will attend. Health workers delivering weekly medication to rural areas, nurses providing home care services, all face the same wall of fuel scarcity. This is not just a delay. It potentially means lost lives. The logistics sector, the country's lifeblood, is completely gridlocked. When a courier making city deliveries spends half their day in a gas line, the number of orders they can complete drops by half. For businesses, this means increased costs. For customers, it means delayed packages. When a concrete mixer fails to arrive on time at a construction site, a multi-million-dollar construction project comes to a halt. When trucks that are supposed to pick up goods from a ship docked at a port cannot leave the warehouse, a global supply chain breaks down. 2 hours lost somewhere in Russia translates into a price tag increase somewhere else and a canceled shift schedule somewhere else. This is a paralysis that spreads to every cell of the economy. This crisis is not just an economic headline, but also a profound social and psychological test. For a generation of Russians who grew up with the narrative of an energy superpower, a photo of an empty gas pump is not just a nuisance, but also a national disappointment and humiliation. This situation leads to questioning the state's most fundamental competence. If you can't provide gasoline to your citizens in a country full of oil and gas, what can you manage? This anxiety triggers irrational behavior in society. Even people with half-full tanks rush to stations out of fear of what tomorrow may bring, creating unnecessary panic buying. This further increases pressure on the already scarce supply, creating a vicious cycle that lengthens the lines. As in every crisis, the black market reflex emerges. Fuel stored dangerously in barrels in apartment, basement, and garages begins to be sold under the table at 2 or 3 times the normal price. This is not only robbery, but also a major security risk. Poor quality or mixed fuels damage car engines, while improper storage methods also carry the risk of fire and explosion. The state is trying to manage the shortage on the one hand while having to combat this illegal market it has created on the other. Russia's supply chain has lost its rhythm. Invisible items, such as insurance and freight, have become permanently more expensive, while queues form at pumps domestically.